Thanks for sticking around. Very glad to see all of you back for a panel that I'm very excited about, that I think a lot of us are very excited about, talking about the future of hypersonics. Who understands what a hypersonic is by like definition? Because it's thrown around a lot. We got one or two. Great. This is something that moves 5 times the speed of sound. That is your hyper, that is your sonic, your sound barrier. Really, all traditional intercontinental ballistic missiles from the Cold War era on are technically hypersonic, but they're defeatable because the reason they achieve that speed is they go very high up into space and then come down. So it's just basically because there's space. New era of hypersonics are completely different. They are incredibly maneuverable. So they're moving at 5 times the speed of sound, but according to a trajectory that is difficult to predict. Russia has them, China has them, we're developing them. They've been called the sort of invincible weapon, incredibly concerned about it. And of course, China and Russia have a tremendous stockpile of missiles that can be deployed for a variety of purposes. And this has given rise to concerns about protecting the United States homeland, in addition, of course, to protecting U.S. Forces, assets, and allies all around the world from a drone and missile threat that is expanding by scale far faster than we can affordably create, standard missile 6s to shoot those things out of the sky. So this is the basis, it is the frame for our discussion here right now. Hypersonics, Golden Dome, and the future of missile defense. Please join me in welcoming Major General Mike Piper, Deputy Director of Operations at NORAD, Mateo Dahlgren, Fellow Missile Defense Project at SCIS, and Doug Lavero, the President of Lavero Consulting. Come on up, guys.
You're taking that one.
Okay. Thanks. So,
I'll go to this side.
Oh, you're going to sit over there? Okay.
Where we can see.
I guess we get to sit wherever. I didn't know that. All right. Well, Jen, we're very excited, and we're all very lucky to have you here because General Piper is in charge of Golden Dome, every aspect of it. He's going to write all the checks personally. He has to design all the satellites and also launch several of them himself. So I'm kidding, of course. At NORAD, you have an operational duty to kind of figure out how a concept like this is something you're going to have to work with. You're going to have to think about the future of protecting the U.S. homeland from missile threats. And Golden Dome is a concept that is now a thing of discussion and energy that is something you're going to have to deal with. Unfortunately, you don't have to write the checks or launch the satellites. But talk to us a little bit before we get started with everybody else. A little bit about your operational needs when you think about the future of American missile defense in the era of hypersonics, and to the extent that you can offer something on Golden Dome and how you're talking about it, either with your staff or with other folks at the Pentagon, what you're saying.
You bet, Patrick. Thanks for the question, and thanks for everybody being here and the opportunity to speak. I think when you think about integrated air and missile defense overall, not just where we are today, but especially where it needs to be in the future, very broadly speaking, you're going to have 3 areas. We need to talk about the kit, what widgets we're going to buy. We need to understand the technologies for that. We need to understand the cost for that. That's certainly one big bucket. Need to understand the connective tissue. How are we going to tie all these tools together? Common operating picture, CJAD, C2. I think everybody understands that idea. There's both IT challenges in there and policy challenges in there. And then the third area, which is kind of where more of my brain power goes to from my role right now in operations, is if we get the kit and we get the kit talking to itself, how do we actually operate it? And I mean the how we use it in terms of things like authorities, in terms of COMREL, command relationships, in terms of rules of engagement. We have those things now at a much smaller scale. But as capabilities expand, and as you have a requirement now to cross seams in terms of time and seams in space or seams in authorities, we need to figure out how to cross those at a minimal amount of risk.
Yeah, and that's even before the era of hypersonics, that understanding of authorities and particularly like relationships with other countries for things like missile defense is hugely complex. I remember a story that I wrote about, here's the thing, if North Korea were ever to launch a missile at the United States, it would probably go head northwards because that's the most direct route. To intercept it, we might have to intercept that missile over continental Russia, which might appear as though we were intercepting a missile over Russia. And that was before you get into highly maneuverable hypersonics. So let me turn to you, Matteo, and give us a second to kind of explain right now the state of the missile defense threat from Russia and China. How freaked out should we really be? And how far behind, if we're behind, are we, either from the defense side or fielding a similar sort of capability?
Sure. You know, it's interesting to think of hypersonic weapons as a thing that's a technical threat, right? It sort of exists between the space-based ballistic missile threat and sort of the air-based cruise missile and drone threat. But I think really what we should be looking at is how these weapons are an organizational or institutional threat. They exploit these institutional gaps and seams that we talk about, these authorities that we talk about. You know, it's neither an air threat nor a space threat, and so there's a whole set of doctrine that needs to be developed. Now, when you're looking at Russia and China, what is terrifying about the threat that's posed isn't necessarily the systems right now, but the industrial base that's powering them, right? China tests hypersonic weapons 10 times, many multiples the times we do. If you look at the hypersonic testing infrastructure, it's a 2-year wait time to build a factory. It's a 2-year wait time to get into the wind tunnel. It's a 2-year wait time to get onto the test range. And even to get to the test range, you need to have an FAA, you have to have a DoD approval process, right, to contract with the range, the officers, and actually get that flight test going. And so there's all these institutional barriers that Russia and China are really exploiting here. There are these industrial barriers and industrial advantages that they're exploiting that need more attention.
Yeah, I think that's terrifying. It's a great wake-up call, and it does speak to why we need to really think about missile defense in a way that we haven't since the Cold War, because the technology has changed, has shifted, and there are new capabilities now that are bringing that level of threat back. But along those lines, we are now talking about a new concept for integrated air and missile defense, and it has a name. And so Doug Lavaro from Lavaro Consulting, he's kind of the Golden Dome whisperer. He's I'm always surprised by
I'm actually shouting most of the
time. He knows a lot of people and a lot of folks, and he knows a lot of what's actually going on in this discussion, which remains fairly amorphous, but is cementing. So it's been described, Golden Dome, as kind of a next Manhattan Project for integrating like missile defense, integrating sensors, integrating interceptors, and command nodes to deal with everything from cruise missiles, or as we were talking about, these now more and more plentiful, highly maneuverable hypersonics. Todd Harrison, who great friend of mine, very good thinker on this subject, has said this concept is still not validated and could spiral into something that is politically irresistible but practically unworkable. How workable, from what you've heard right now in terms of the executive order, in terms of the standing up of the new office, how workable is the big idea of Golden Dome? And how soon before we get something that feels kind of Golden Dome-like, that takes things we already have, ground-based interceptors, space-based observation of missiles, and we decide that maybe that's good enough for right now? Like your overall view of the entire concept. Where are they getting too ambitious? What's practically achievable?
Thanks, Pat, and thanks everybody for having me today. You talked about being a Golden Dome whisperer. I don't know if this counts as whispering or not, but I happened to be at a funeral with General Gutlein the day after he was in the Oval Office. I'm not going to tell you anything that he said because that would violate those privileges. But I told them I wasn't sure if I should offer him congratulations or condolences on his assignment, because I think that actually brackets everything that you just talked about.
Yeah.
This is a hard problem, and people have compared it to a Manhattan Project, and I personally believe that's a poor comparison, because the Manhattan Project was to build one thing to be delivered once. It wasn't we weren't designing a nuclear missile force. We did that later. We did that in the 50s with General Schriever and the ICBM force, and Admiral Rickover and the Polaris and Poseidon force. So we did those later on a different time scale. And those are actually, in my mind, better analogs for what we're doing here than the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was fantastic. It was an amazing feat, absolutely, new science being created while you're creating weapons. But we're talking about an incredibly complex system.
Yeah.
With as the general said, this isn't just an incredible command and control problem amongst organizations. It's an incredible command and control problem amongst acquisition entities.
Yeah.
About trying to figure out who's going to do what, how are they going to do it. You asked, is it doable? Well, that depends upon what it is.
Right.
Okay. I happen to be very supportive. I was glad to see the executive order come out. I wasn't necessarily happy with everything that was in the executive order, but I was glad to see it come out because I think too long we have been living on the deterrence philosophy that I grew up with, that many of you grew up with, which was mutually assured destruction, which has been a great deterrence philosophy as long as what you're trying to deter is total nuclear war. It does a good job at that. But it doesn't deter, and I'm just going to spitball here and make up something. Let's say there happened to be a war in Europe and somebody was threatening that if we provided arms to one of the sides, they would launch a nuclear bomb. It's just a completely unreal situation. Never really happened, but let's say that, right? Well, if you don't have the ability to intercept that bomb, that missile, you have to rethink your strategy to support those forces. If you happen to have a rogue nation in the Middle East developing a couple of nuclear warheads and could break out at any time, you have to worry about that. And you can't go ahead and necessarily decide just then to go ahead and put a new missile field on the East Coast, even if it could intercept enough missiles. There are all sorts of levels of nuclear conflict that occur right above conventional war, but well below total nuclear war. And right now, every rung of that ladder, that escalation ladder, is a rung that an enemy can choose to exploit and could cause us to go ahead and question whether or not we could move forward. Golden Dome eliminates a lot of those rungs.
Okay.
It eliminates those rungs. It is not going to go ahead, regardless of how this may come across, it's not going to eliminate every missile that's launched. It's not going to be able to deal with total nuclear war. We're still going to go ahead and have to depend upon mutually assured destruction for that. But it can eliminate, depending upon how well we do, the 10, the 20, the 50, maybe the 100 missiles that could be used to go ahead and put the U.S. back on its heels when we're trying to go ahead and get into Taiwan.
Yeah.
So I think it is an ability to go ahead and remove rungs of the escalation ladder.
Yeah.
And I happen to think that's incredibly practical to do.
Okay. So it's true. There's a big question of like what the it is. Moving out against these new modern and very real threats, this dispersion of threats across the globe is important and timely and overdue. But that's also something that you kind of do all the time, or try to do all the time, wouldn't you say, General? And so with that, you have some things at your disposal now that you never had before. You can apply artificial intelligence or machine learning, for instance, to radar to create potentially new radar capabilities out of hardware that doesn't have to change too much. So this was a very important program out of NORAD and Northcom to do that. You have launch costs that are going down all the time. You can put more things up there, but you also have this proliferation of threats. So talk to us really quickly about how you see exactly that dilemma, the decreasing cost of an adversary force to potentially field missiles, and how you then treat that threat at the earliest stage before you start seeing them move more likely to move towards the United States.
So to segue from what Doug said, we have deterrence by cost imposition, our nuclear triad. We have some capability in deterrence by denial, which is really what defeat capabilities we have right now.
Right.
If you go back to kind of just from a NORAD Northcom perspective, our defeat mechanism was essentially the fighter force, early warning, and it was really going after a single axis, coming from the 10 to 2 o'clock position, and it was the Russian bombers. And that was really the only defeat mechanism we had. 9/11 happened, we had to look more to internal threat, counter VEOs. We used the fighters in the same thing. North Korea, we developed the ground-based midcourse. That was another defeat mechanism. But we have some national capital region defense, but it's relatively a limited kit from where we want to be.
Yeah.
So I think the first question is we clearly need to add more defeat capability, wherever that is based, whether or not it's based on the ground, in the air, in space, cyberspace, et cetera. So that I think is number one. Number two is we need to get out of the mindset, and I think most people in this room understand this and have evolved long ago, that Homeland Defense does not start at our shores. It's a global mission. It starts well beyond our shores, to include, as was mentioned in the executive order, left of launch. And so that is a capability, could be a defeat capability that we have. We have to be able to command and control that in a way that crosses domains, that crosses, as I said, seams in space and time and authorities. But we want options across that entire, like take the example of just, a weapon flying from North Korea.
Yeah.
Today, I don't want to say that that's easy, but it's ballistic. We generally know where it's going to go. We generally know how long it's going to take to get here. And we have a specific capability and specific sensors that are all tied together with a very clear chain of command, very clear shared TTPs. And we can do that. It's very complicated, but not necessarily complex. As we add more of that, what we really want is myriad capabilities across the entire globe that are available at any time, in any place, at our disposal, and we can decide which action to take at what point, say, in the phase of flight of an adversary weapon, to include left of launch. So I think I'm going to get all the way back to your end question of, way in the future, a good problem to have would be catastrophic success if we get domain awareness where we want it to be. We have multiple capabilities to defeat at our disposal. We might actually have too much information and too many options. And I think that might be one area where we can integrate AI to kind of narrow that down for us to make the best decision. And it really helps with the decision superiority aspect that we're driving towards.
So of the things that Golden Dome could be, one aspect of it that would be the most functional, if we're just talking about future successful missile defense without just interception, it's finding ways to disrupt an adversary before they begin to launch a missile, possibly while they're constructing a missile. Being able to monitor all adversarial missile activity anywhere on the globe at any time, including picking up predictive signals of intent, and then, if need be, shooting down however many of them there are that have launched. But if you've done parts 1 and 2 correctly, then you've deterred at the earliest stage before the launch.
I agree.
So, yes, Patel, please.
I was going to say, think tankers for the past 6 years, 7 years, there was an assumption that it would be hard to defeat missiles left of launch. That permeated the policy conversation and oftentimes stymied, discussions of missile defense. There were these claims that left of launch would be escalatory, that it would rob capacity from missile defense. That was a common refrain. Even last year, 2 years ago. And look how all that's changed with the Israel-Iran situation, right? Left of launch eliminated so many missiles that would have been launched. It's part of an integrated system of offense and defense. I think that's a big sea change.
And I think that's because also, like, the way that we can have credibility in the data we're collecting about what an adversary is doing, we have space pictures. We have a lot of space pictures, and that can join other intelligence to say, yes, it seems as though the Houthis might be moving with a missile in this direction, and so that is a valid threat. So you have like a higher degree of confidence in what's actually happening all over the world. That is based on commercial satellite imagery, other data sources, and that creates the operational room to move more effectively against things when, in the earliest stages. But to this point about what we're seeing in the Red Sea particularly, this speaks to another big problem that I think Golden Dome tries to speak to, and that is the economics of missile defense. And they're just not generous to us. They just don't look that good. For the price of, some of these different types of Houthi missiles, it's like a $12,000 one, $14,000. Some of them are that low. They're not terribly effective, but that's a nice price point compared to a United States Standard Missile 6, which is about $30 million. And that Standard missile is going to hit that thing, but the economics aren't particularly good for us. And that's just going to proliferate. That proliferates too when you're talking about some of the more fantastical aspects of the Golden Dome concept, satellites that can destroy missiles that are moving towards the United States, which is weapons in space. That's expensive. General, when you think about that disparity of economic capability, it's always going to be easier to make more missiles than it is to be able to make the things to defeat them. How do you approach that problem right now, and do you see it getting worse?
Well, one of the challenges I think always is the sexier your capability has a direct impact on the cost, right? So we always lean, I think, towards sexy kinetic solutions to things. I think that's just generally the way the Pentagon thinks about things. And I don't necessarily have a whole lot of confidence that that will ever change. I think there's a certain inherent attraction to that type of solution. However, about the only thing that we like better in some ways than optics is actual results. And if we can show that something is just as effective for that, that will get people's attention. Just as one example I think of right now of like starting to shoot laser rockets at one-way attack drones.
Yeah.
Much cheaper cost per unit rather than that. And, you know, granted, rockets are sexy, are sexy as well, but when we get into things that make a difference, if we can show results, if we can show either the test or the real world application of that, I think that might be one way that we can start chipping at the cost. Are we ever going to get to the point where this is going to be an economic endeavor that's favorable on the fiscal side?
No.
I don't think so. It costs money to be safe. Defensive is expensive, the future is expensive, but that doesn't mean it needs to be exorbitant.
Yeah, see, and that speaks to what we were talking about this morning at the very first thing. Imagine something that's difficult, expensive, and hard, becoming easy, cheap, more available to everybody. That's missiles, that's what's happening, and that is always going to exist, that economics, but you still have to figure out how to keep in the game, even if you're never going to be cheaper.
Let me jump in on there, because this is an issue of economics that sometimes we misunderstand. We talk about the cost of the missile.
Yeah.
Okay, but the missile you didn't just buy it yesterday and that's all you spent on it. It was bought 10 years ago. It's been in a silo for the last 10 years. You had to build the silo. You had to build the command and control for it. You had to go ahead and maintain it. You had to go ahead and do all of the things you have to do to it. And that actually becomes very expensive. The reason we don't have unlimited missile forces isn't because missiles are expensive. It's because maintaining a missile force is expensive. So there's not an unlimited amount of missiles that you can throw at things. And as I said before, you don't need to have enough capability to intercept every missile. You have to have enough capability to make sure the adversary is unsure of whether or not his missiles are going to get through. The gentleman from Andrew who was up earlier, I think he was exactly on the right point. We have to look at how do we create things at scale for the right cost. There is nothing that implicitly says that a space-based interceptor has to cost $1 billion a piece. Just like, now we used to think a missile warning satellite had to cost $3 billion a piece. I think we've seen through what SDA has done. Now you can do it for $40 million a piece. And quite frankly, if you did more of them at scale and you could do the kind of production that SpaceX or Kuiper is going to do, you probably can do it at $5 million a piece. So part of this is as we solve the problem, is to focus on how do we go ahead and get the capacity we need at the cost we need, recognizing we don't need to defeat the cost of the missile. We need to just go ahead and create a cost imposition in the adversary's mind that says, this isn't going to be worth it.
Yeah. You bet hell, yeah.
I think that missile defense exploits an institutional gap in China's doctrine. China's military, its NCO Corps, its entire training deals poorly with many kinds of uncertainty. And so if you can make it uncertain that a runway on Guam would stay open for 6 hours at the outset of a conflict, that's a big deal. If we can make it uncertain that the first session in this conference was going to be 30 minutes late, that would affect the entire operation, even if you could only affect that one small thing.
For the record, we started on time.
And so, even if you're capacity limited in applying missile defense and using missile defense, that one thing at the beginning of the conference, that one thing at the beginning of a campaign can have a cascading effect, I think, on China's perception of its ability to win conflicts.
Yeah.
But on the cost thing, I think that the high cost of missile defense will force us to think about really weird things. Our defense industry often produces at government scale, while China's industrial base produces at a consumer scale. We have only a small number of suppliers that builds infrared focal plane arrays for missile tracking satellites. There's like 2 fab facilities in the United States that produce all of them. China produces millions and millions of IR focal plane arrays for consumer markets and government markets. Radar depends on GaN semiconductors.
Oh yeah, China has a lot of the market on GaN semiconductors.
But that flipped in the past couple of years because of consumer demand from their their electric vehicle sector.
Yeah.
Right. And so they have that kind of wind behind them, pushing them to build these chips cheaper, wafers bigger, build more GaN, and they have the lock on the minerals themselves. And so I think that's the cost challenge that we really have to deal with when competing at this level.
Yeah, the supply chain thing. It's because this is the thing. We're talking about drones all the time and building drones out in mass. And one of the things I wanted to bring up with Chris is, because Andrew's actually very good at this, the supply for everything from the the geometers that tell the drone where it is, to the lenses, to the cameras. China has the supply lock on a lot of the components for consumer drones. And so that's a problem, potentially, if we're going to rely on a solution of lots of consumer drones in order to create a deterrence effect. In terms of missile defense, though, I wanted to ask you, General, where is there a supply gap in terms of fielding a sufficient number of systems, interceptors, to create that deterrent effect in terms of getting things in the air? Where might there be a gap that must be addressed right now?
I think when Doug made the point about you can't defend everything, that is such a key point, especially at the beginning of where we are right now with the future of integrated air missile defense, because in some ways you have to make some assumptions and define, okay, at what scale are we going to defend?
Yeah.
I think we would all prefer to have just a big trampoline painted whatever color you want over the continent that has any threat bounce off of it. I think we would all like that. Maybe we'll get to that someday. But in the meantime, if we say, hey, it's at this type of scale, we can perhaps approximate how much quantity we need, what the cost per unit would be. So I think there needs to be an iterative discussion amongst industry, a bunch of operational requirements and policy. We have to scope this project with a certain amount of granularity at the beginning. There's always going to be an aspect where we are building this airplane as we're flying it. That's a circumstance we're in right now. But I think that's a key discussion at the beginning.
So having said that, and start thinking of your questions. I want to get some hands up pretty soon. But I want to go back to what one of the sexy kinetic solutions that is in the executive order that I've written about, that a lot of other people have written about. Sexy kinetic solutions, by the way, it sounds like either a really good electronica band or a really bad temp agency. I don't know which one. But that is space-based interceptors. We're going to put things in low Earth orbit that either have missiles or lasers that will shoot the satellite, or the satellite itself becomes like a kamikaze satellite. It becomes the kinetic interceptor, hurtles towards Earth, smashes a highly maneuverable hypersonic as it drifts through the higher Earth atmosphere. This is crazy stuff. We've never made anything like this ever before. How much will these things cost? And how are they actually talking about that aspect of it when you talk to the people you talk to?
Sure. So first of all, I want to confirm that what you said is correct. This is crazy stuff. But in a different, and I don't mean that cynically, we're not going to intercept the hypersonic glide vehicle with a space-based interceptor. There's not enough deorbit capacity on anything that's in low Earth orbit to come to deorbit. It's not Star Trek where they jump off of the ship and they fall directly to Earth. It doesn't happen that way. It's really hard to get out. It's hard to get into orbit. It's really hard to get out of orbit. So we're not going to do hypersonics, counter hypersonics with space-based interceptors. We can counter some missiles with space-based interceptors in boost phase, but there's only a few. You mentioned Todd Harrison. Todd published a paper early on in this, which basically said, look, it takes about 2,000 missiles, 2,000 interceptors in space to assuredly intercept one missile in boost phase. If you want to go ahead and assuredly intercept two, you need 4,000 interceptors. So we're not going to do it. What we're going to do is what is practical to do and what is necessary to do is to do mid-course interception, which is easier from a intercept perspective, harder from a discrimination and tracking perspective.
To describe mid-course for folks that don't.
So mid-course is after the missile burns out, it releases a reentry vehicle bus. The bus may have one reentry vehicle on it. It may have several on it. It flies through its course. If it's a maneuvering bus, it can maneuver in space. It eventually releases the reentry vehicle, and then the reentry vehicles come down at their aim points. And that time scale, depending upon where the missiles are launched from and where the missiles are, or where the warheads are going, could be anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes long. So that's enough time. Not only is it enough time for you to intercept them, it's enough time for multiple of your interceptors to have shots at them. So you can choose which of the cohort of, so it's not just the interceptor that happens to be over China right now, trying to hit the 2 minutes of boost phase. It's all of the interceptors trying to figure out where in their flight path is the best place for the intercept the reentry vehicle or the bus in their flight path.
See, and that speaks to like the complexity of your problem that you were just talking about. If you're talking about something that it's now you can intercept it with much more credibility, much more probability, 30 minutes after it lifts off, and that thing is over a different country now, and you need 2,000 little like kamikaze satellites potentially to take it out. Are you going to be, I mean, how do you become the general who ordered like 3,000 kamikaze satellites descend towards Earth over which country? Like, how are you guys talking about that? I mean, well, not that specifically. That's an insane thing to think about. But how are you thinking about the different concepts of operation and authority structure that you need to do that sort of interception?
Yeah. From an operational standpoint, that is the exact example of talking about seams across geography, seams across domains, seams across authorities. You take an example of, let's just pick, say, the Western Pacific Ocean. You've got an air or sea-launched aeroballistic missile that starts in one domain, goes into space, comes back down, and you've got myriad opportunities to take that out. Who decides that? At what level of priority? So, for example, it may be our first option to take that out, may be something from our Navy over in the Indo-PACOM AOR. And we have that opportunity. But Admiral Paparo might say, I've got other things going on right now, and it may not be necessarily his priority. So do we wait till it goes into, say, the Spacecom domain, and hey, maybe General Whiting has other priorities, and he knows that there's some game back in the homeland, and hey, General Guillot, it's coming your way, sir, I can't help you on this one. I think just one of the fundamental challenges that we are going to have with this complex global thing that is Homeland Integrated Air and Missile Defense is that you're going to have multiple combatant commands who are going to act simultaneously as supported commanders and as supporting commanders. And we have to have that worked out in advance. We need to exercise it. We need to war game it. We need to have rules of engagement that can be, I would say, flexible enough to have it centralized when we need it to be, and then have it decentralized so that we can execute it at the speed and scale if it gets to that point.
Yeah, and when that happens, that Netflix story is going to be really good because it's set up for, because you can see it's taking place over one day. You got 30 minutes. Oh, it's set. It's very Hollywood setup. All right, let's have some hands. Let's have some questions here. We talked about the future of integrated air and missile defense across the United States. We haven't even talked about how artificial intelligence might change all of that. And here we go. We got one right here, I think, is moving towards. Is he one? Oh, there we go. Yep. Yes, please.
Yeah, how's it going? Somewhat of a little different ask, right? How will the space UDL play a role in the Golden Dome? And will it?
Space what? Sorry,
Space Systems Unified Data Library.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I'll just start with, everything begins with domain awareness. We can't shoot what we can't see. We can't defend against what we can't see. And having a mesh network of all the sensors is really the first place we need to start. So if you're asking anything more technical than that, I know my limits, and I'll probably stop there. But the concept of getting away from, example, Patriot's a fantastic system, but it was designed to have the shooter and the sensor in the same place talking to each other. Same thing with our ground-based mid-course. What we really want, to a certain extent, right, is a sensor-agnostic network that any shooter can use any sensor at any time to choose the best solution.
Yeah,
you got to have the connective tissue to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to the fact that so much of what is going to be Golden Dome is in progress, in development, just going by a different name, and mesh networks in space, basically thinking organisms of satellites in space that are doing compute and analysis on platforms, sharing it with the ground. This is an entirely new thing, and it's going to play a really critical role, and it's a big enabler. So let's have...
Let me jump in. So I think the general's got it exactly right. We actually have in really some of its early stages of development a network that will do this right now. This is what SDA has been working on, although for a different purpose when they were doing it. This is what MILNET, as you've all read recently, will be part of. This is what MDA has been working on for a long time, is meshing all that information together in C2BMC. You've heard of the GMTI program that the Space Force and NRO are working on together. That's the pre-launch custody of the targets that we have. There's going to be a huge amount of information coming from the space domain, and other domains, that is all going to have to be sorted out, presented to the commander, so the commander can go ahead and make decisions about what he's going to do. That really is probably one of the hardest things in this process, is to figure out how that information all gets presented to a decision maker to make a decision.
Yeah. Okay, we got one over here. Yep.
I'm asking about the fact that, maybe off base here, but the fact that the U.S. Navy is testing Helios right now. It has a 5-mile range of a hit with a 60-watt laser. Can you comment on the practicality of possibly using this as a dome solution rather than just trying to shoot missile to missile?
Oh, also, could you, your name, affiliation?
Oh, I'm sorry. Peter Treese, DevOps Design.
Thank you very much.
I'm a laser guy.
Yeah, hit it.
Lasers are great. I love lasers. My first love in life is lasers. I actually have the patent on the laser that was on the airborne laser aircraft way back when. Exactly. Somebody's clapping back there. It's fantastic. But lasers have their limitations. Lasers have their limitations in the fact that they only go so far through the atmosphere before they become unfocused. It's almost like a game show. You have to be present to win, right? The laser has to be close enough to the target in order to go ahead and do it. The only targets that are vulnerable enough in this system that really lasers can be used for are either cruise missiles or boosting missiles. You're not going to go ahead and attack a hypersonic cruise missile with a laser. It's already got a TPS shield that can withstand as much heat as you can put into it for flight. You're not going to go ahead and attack a RV in flight with a laser, because it's got all of the heat shielding as well for reentry. So there's a limited class of systems. We've looked at, my wife's first program in the Air Force was working on a space-based laser in 1985, right, or 1981. That's not, she was 2 years old at the time. I want to confirm that. Okay, she was very young. Okay. These are great systems, but they have limitations because they only can operate in certain parts of the kill chain envelope.
No.
And that probably makes them impractical for at least the space-based portion of this. Certainly the Navy, as you said, has already put these into service for conventional cruise missile defense.
Yeah, I remember like a couple of years ago during the first Trump administration, Peter Griffin, his first undersecretary for research and engineering, was a former NASA administrator, came out one day and, it's sort of an exhausting afternoon and made a little announcement. I think that we should go back and look at some of the concepts from the 1990s and resurrect them, like neutral particle beams in space in order to destroy boost phase missiles. And no one was paying attention. I'm like, that thing is a football field-sized ray gun in space to destroy missiles in boost phase. And it turned out it was impractical. So it's funny story about that. But yes, Dale, you had a thought.
I guess the one thing I'll add is lasers are directed energy are highly sensitive to different weather conditions. It's often said that, it can be an orders of magnitude difference depending on the turbulence of the air around the laser. And so, fielding directed energy will increase the demand for weather prediction systems. AI for weather prediction is one area that's very interesting. Weather mitigation, new modes of kind of basing lasers closer or further, apart, depending on weather, that we're really looking at right now.
Yeah. Okay, so we got time for maybe one or two more. Before we do, General, I wanted to ask you, because we're sort of like winding down the clock here. In terms of all of the things that we've just talked about, lasers in space, kamikaze satellites, all of these other things, your job is actually making this deterrence. What is the most important thing that has to change now in order to make sure that that deterrence is still credible? And it doesn't have to be the sexy kinetics, it could be any number of things. What's the most important thing you're doing now to make sure that our deterrence credibility is there for this new school of rapidly evolving threats?
I think Doug already mentioned this a little bit. The first one is, this is an aspect, if you want to talk about the modernization of IMD, right? That is connected to our modernization and recapitalization of our nuclear enterprise. There's clearly connective tissue in there. And I think, Doug, you mentioned this, the idea of we don't want our only deterrent to basically either be the triad or a very limited capability to defeat in just kind of little stovepipes are right now. We want to be able to do it in multiple areas across the entire continent in multiple phases of flight. So I think the first thing that we can do is start tying together the things that already exist. I think it would be a good portion of the way towards what success looks like if we just tie together what we already have. And then the last thing I would say is I think it's going to be a combination of both kind of grassroots, innovative, bottom-up development, and those ideas, as well as kind of a top-down driven overarching thing that, pending confirmation, I think that would be General Gutline's purview.
Yeah, and there you have it. And then you have a golden dome. And we did it so cheap, no one even knew we could do it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the panel for this wonderful discussion.